perhaps because like for a while, we were still walking, so something catching our eye while you're moving isn't quite the same as when you just sort of pause and are taking it all in, and then you start seeing things moving, but nothing's there. That was just the easiest way to make out how close they actually were. Because when I mentioned that we would see motion, that's exactly because it's so hard to describe because usually when you see motion, there's something that you see moving, but this was literally like we saw the motion and it drew our eye, but there was no shadow, it was just movement, and it's so bizarre.
Yes, and many children see them too. About 75% of the world's children today are being born with etheric vision. And when your children talk with people and have daydream playmates, the chances are they are actually speaking to some of these people, because these angels or angelic forces or nature spirits, as they're often called, will often make themselves seen.
Whatever it is, it looks every bit like a fairy and very little like anything else.
But seriously, it kind of looks like a fairy. Just kind of doesn't look like your standard mall.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
But I wasn't going to make this video until I looked a little bit closer and I realized after it lands behind my bench, it disappears. And it just vanishes. And in fact, I went outside to look, to try to find it, to see if it was trash, to see if it was a bug, to see if it was a leaf, like trying to figure out what it could be, and it was gone. It just vanished.
What's that? Yeah. What's what? Yeah, look. Right up there. Insect or something.
Is that an insect? Let's have a look. What is it?
I don't know. Oh my god!
Ugh.
What happens to people who cut down fairy films?
Did you see it? Huh? Did you see it?
Yeah, me and him saw it.
What'd you see?
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I'm not going to BS you guys. One of my partners said they saw something fall out of the sky too, so that's why I'm kind of curious. Did you see anything land in your backyard?
The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real.
Welcome back, everybody, to Fascinating Fae. This evening, we're very fortunate to receive a story from a gentleman named Aaron, calling today from Indiana. Aaron, how are you doing this evening?
I am good. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate you making yourself available and taking the time to share your story with us. So today, Aaron's going to tell us about an interesting incident he had around 2006 in a state park in Indiana, where he has encountered something best resembling the predator. So Aaron, here on the Fascinating Fae podcast, we are not here to convince anyone of anything. The purpose of this podcast is to let people tell us their stories as they happened. And so what I would like to ask you to do is just take your time, there's no rush here. Walk us into, if you could please, your encounter with this predator-like creature. And what I mean by that is just sort of tell us where you were. I know you mentioned you were in a state park. What were you doing there? Just take us back a little bit in the day. Give us some context to what happens next. And then if you could, please just walk us into your encounter in as much detail as you can recall, please.
Okay. Um, yeah, I had learned about the place called Oke Poke, and it was through a paranormal group that a local paranormal group that I had followed. I was active in the forums, and a lot of investigators would go out there because the area was known for its activity and as being just a haunted forest. Um, so a friend and I, we just decided one day we'd just take a day trip down to check it out. And when we got there, I think it was probably only around 11, 12 o'clock p.m., like in the afternoon. It was early spring, and like, I mean, it was a perfect day. There were barely any clouds in the sky. The leaves were just starting to bud, so there wasn't. So for what we saw, there weren't really a lot of shadows or anything coming from the leaves or anything up above to obscure um, what we what we saw. And when you go in, it's a very remote place. And we had parked in a clearing because there's no actual parking lots, even though it's part of a state park system. And we got out of the car. We're just looking around. We started just following one of the trails back into the woods. And the way it was already a little odd, and because we would stop and just sort of take it all in. Sound travels a little bit different there, and I think some of it's just the way the hills are, and it was even something that I saw some of the investigators and the paranormal people mentioned how sound just is different there. So I don't know how much is the land or how much is just whatever it is about the land that makes it so active. But as we're just going along and taking it all through, we would start seeing motion, and it wasn't always out of the corner of our. I'm sorry, it wasn't always out of the corner of our eyes, which a lot of times with like paranormal stuff, people will mention things out of the corner of their eyes. Sometimes what we were seeing, like we were looking forward, and something would move, and it would draw our eye. So it was in our direct field of vision, but it wasn't there. And that's why I liken it to the Predator, kind of like the camp when it's camouflaged in the movie. And so we just got to a point where we just decided to just stop along the trail. We would just look out through the trees, and we could make out the motion. And I grew up very rural, so I'd play in the fields or go along with my grandfather when he would go out into some of the woods looking for mushrooms or to cut wood. And there is like a weird distortion you can get sometimes where branches or grasses and things can crisscross at a distance that kind of makes just like a weird optical illusion. But so I was used to that, and this was when we saw it and it caught our eye, but it didn't move. We could make out it was very defined, but it was still very subtle, but figure. And we could tell they're about 4.5 feet tall. And sometimes they would be only within maybe 10 or 12 feet of us. And we never felt threatened. And it was just so bizarre because we're just standing there and we're each we're checking back and forth with each other to make sure that we are both seeing what we think we are. And it was almost like whatever they were just as curious about us. And my friend is psychically sensitive, and they got little bits and pieces, and they had mentioned that they were sort of getting that whatever the entities we're so used to usually when people are out there, because it's so remote, you just get a bunch of people going out and partying and just making a ruckus, and then they were dealing with people who are genuinely there just to take it in or look for something, because we were hoping we were going to see something. We just didn't figure it would be in the middle of the day in bright daylight and just right in front of us. So we just stood and took it in, and as it seemed that the activity had sort of moved off a little bit, we were on our way back to the van, and at one point, a very large disembodied shadow just catches our eye. It went through a treetop, and again, there's no leaves. There weren't really any clouds in the sky. Because I stood and looked, I was looking for vultures or a plane, like anything that could have cast a shadow that size, and there was nothing up there, and there was again no leaves. Like there was nothing to really obscure my view of anything that big. And so we just sort of looked at each other and accepted that we just saw whatever that shadow was. And as we neared the van, we heard the sound of, because it was a very well walked path. So we heard the sound of a leaf skipping down the trail behind us. But the thing that caused us to pause at the same time is because we both realized that we were walking into the wind, and the sound of the leaf was coming up behind us and getting closer. So we just stopped, looked at each other, made sure we both heard the leaf, and we just went through the entire thought process. Because, walking into the wind, you should not hear a leaf getting closer to you. But it was very distinct. And of course, we turned around and we didn't see any leaf in the path, but we very distinctly heard the sound. But yeah, so we'd gotten back to the van just in disbelief, because that's just one of those things where you know what you saw, but it's just still so hard to really process it. And we tried to do a part where we picked up some rubbish and stuff that people had just left, so when we went out, we could dispose of it. Just sort of a just a friendly gesture for who or whatever it was that lives out there. And yeah, so just the whole way back home, we're just talking and just trying to figure out just what we experienced. And I think it was the next day, I was talking to my friend, because she had called, and apparently, and it was on the side of the van that I was sitting on, and there was a very distinct smear of mud on the passenger side of the van that was not there when we left. And there were a few puddles on the way back, but it wasn't from splashing. It very distinctly looked like somebody just took some mud on their fingertips and wiped it on the side of the van. So whether or not something did that as we were driving out and then just didn't notice when we had gotten back, or something hitched a ride and just decided to do it before it left, we don't know. But it was a very interesting experience.
Aaron, wow. Thank you for taking myself and the audience into that encounter. I have some questions that I would like to ask. But before I do, there's a couple things I want to just sort of reflect back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I've done my best in part in this podcast to talk about my own experience a little bit in each episode. If I were to describe my own experience to the audience listening today, I would sound very much like you do, right? Some elements seemingly impossible to conceive of or understand for a listener that may not have encountered a fairy or other type of thing of this nature. So I do think it's brave of you to speak so plainly. And actually, you've done like a very good job of just plainly describing with very little embellishment what you've seen. And I do view that, and whatever you want to take my judgment to mean, I do view that as one of the hallmarks of the people that I speak to who I know are telling the truth, is they have kind of like this duality of just plainly able to describe what happened because they did really see it and experience it.
Right.
Paired with this emotional confusion that they're at the same time that they're saying what they saw, it's like every word is a second guess because there's this underlying tone of emotional confusion of what did I actually see? What was that? etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't know how many people, in a non-friendly setting you've told this story to, but I do think it's brave for you to share it with the audience. Almost to the letter, every time one of these episodes come out, I've been contacted by someone who's listened to say, I have seen that exact same thing.
Oh, wow.
And so do know that there is at least one listener, probably many more than just one, but at least one who's going to be receiving comfort from your act of bravery and talking about what you saw plainly. So I just wanted to say that and thank you again for being here. And, as I thank you, I'm also thanking all of my past guests and all of my future guests and myself for that same sentiment. It's difficult to talk about these things because the immediate go-to of the listener is they insert into their mind what the word fairy means to them. And that might be something just like Tinkerbell. And then they immediately go, of course, that's not true. But when we say fairy, we're talking about a type of energy being that has really weird capabilities in our third dimension, but is a real thing that you came across. And so for that reason, and with that said, I would be honored if I could please ask you some more questions about what you experienced.
Oh, certainly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So It's around noon, midday. It's a nice clear day. Thank you for the distinction about the lack of foliage. The weirdest thing, just before I go on, is the past 3 interviews I've done start with, it was a perfect day.
Oh, wow.
And including my own encounter, which was a near perfect summer solstice day.
Nice.
Interesting how I think that is somehow interrelated. Also, before I ask you a question, I will share an insight as well. A lot of people who see them in an outdoor setting are doing something non-typical to that outdoor setting, meaning you were there just to look and be curious and take it in, whereas maybe other people are there on a quad or crushing beers or whatever, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or hunting, and I was doing something unusual for that setting. My previous guest was with his teenage girlfriend, and they were, one of the first times alone at the beach in the dark kind of thing. And so there seems to be a curiosity, which you highlighted from your friend's intuition, that is a interesting component to a real encounter.
Oh, wow.
Where the entity, the fairy, let's call it, is as curious of us as we are of them. And are curious of us in particular in moments where we as humans are exhibiting our higher selves, essentially, being good in some way or other. They like that and they're curious about that. It would appear a pattern of that type of thing is emerging as a common thread in fairy encounters.
Huh, that is really fascinating.
Yeah, go figure. So also, you did mention your friend said you also, I think, mentioned personally a sense of benevolence or no threat. The fairies are good. They're really good. They're actually not harmful. I don't think. I think that some of the connotations associated with them of tricksters and malevolence is the normal human reaction to something that can't be understood or seen. I can't trust something I can't see or understand, and so it's not their fault that they get portrayed that way. I don't think their behavior is actually good sometimes and bad others. I think the observer is largely to do with the takeaway. But I do think that fairies are quite benevolent. In fact, I think, and I'm just speculating because I don't have one in a jar and I'm not an expert. I just saw one time and I've been talking to people. I do think they're deeply associated with the care for living things. And that includes us, oddly enough. So anyway, moving forward with some of my questions, if I could, please.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first sort of saw these things, I know you made a really good distinction that you saw them come across your vision. So this is what I'd like to talk about. About how far away were they from you when they came across your vision? And what about, and I know that the visual phenomena associated with fairy sightings or interdimensional being sightings is extremely difficult to describe. So don't worry if you struggle for words here, everyone does. Can you just describe for me in a bit more detail, if you could, please, what is it that exactly made you sense motion and what are you looking at? Like the predator is a good example, but if someone's never seen the predator, could you maybe do an example of just verbally do your best to describe what you were seeing, please?
The next best thing I could go for, because I'm a geek, so that's just where my brain went for like the easiest way to describe it. Because it's less defined than the predator. Actually, it's more like the mirage effect you get from like a fire, where you look through it and everything's just sort of wavy. It was closer to that.
I'm imagining hot asphalt on a hot day.
Oh yeah, or that, only in a fairly humanoid shape, about 4 to 4.5 feet tall. Like it was very defined, but it was just very faint. It was almost like trying to do one of those magic eyes where you just sort of had to look, and then you would notice it more.
It's funny that you should mention that because for some weird reason, after speaking with my last guest last night, I was trying to think about the visual phenomena associated with fairies. And it was weird that you just said that in a real way, because I was thinking about the mall as a kid. And I think you're talking about those posters where you had to like defocus your vision in order to see the thing pop out.
Yeah.
For a lot of people listening who are like, say, sub 30, they might not have any idea what we're talking about. But there used to be a thing, back in the 90s, it was a poster craze where at first glance, it just looked like a random set of dots effectively. But if you did a trick with your eye where you looked into the image without looking at it, it's hard to describe the visual thing that you needed to do. This fully three-dimensional thing would pop out, and it was quite fascinating to look at. And it's so weird because I do think that, I'm going to reserve that thought for a second, but is that what you're referring to when you say a magic eye poster?
Yeah, because rather than try to look at any, like the figure directly, I just sort of tried to just look out ahead and take in the whole forest.
Mm-hmm.
That was just the easiest way to make out how close they actually were. Because when I mentioned that we would see motion, that's exactly, because it's so hard to describe, because usually when you see motion, there's something that you see moving, but this was literally like we saw the motion and it drew our eye, but there was no shadow, it was just movement, and it's so bizarre.
Yeah. I want to just stay on this for a second because one of the most interesting aspects of hosting this podcast that's emerging is the attempt to describe the visual sighting of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just offer up some thoughts here and ask some further questions to help us maybe come to an understanding, because I have a pretty good sense of what you're saying, in part because I've seen my own fairy. And here's a question that I'd like to ask. So when you're citing these forms, at any point, are you able to make a distinction as to whether or not this form has... What I'm going to try to ask here is like, is this form appearing as a almost paper thin cutout, or does it appear as though it has girth and width, like the interruption of what you're seeing is more the thickness of a man or an animal type of thing?
It definitely seemed like that there was actual substance to it. So like so kind of like you could tell like in just like science terms, because I don't know how it was working, but like the light being refracted through it, that it was just solid enough and just had just enough substance, which was what was causing it, like with like the mirage effect.
Got it.
So it was just like refraction.
Interesting. So yeah, so if you're to tilt your head and look at it, it's going to be in 3 dimensions essentially.
Yes.
That's very interesting distinction. And I asked that for a particular reason. And after having asked it now, I will say that like fairies, it would appear have a almost at will, I mean, not almost at will, but it would appear they have an at will shape shifting capability. It would also appear that each of them has a kind of native form, and their native forms are very unusual to us. They get close to resembling things that we're used to, but they're a little different. Like it's a moth, but not quite. And like the most recent guest I talked to, after he sent me the drawing and talking to him for another hour offline, thing best described as almost like a 2-dimensional drawing of a Pokemon in real life. Mine was very, illuminated, like as though someone had punched a hole out of the sky and light was shining through.
Wow.
And so it really varies. But, there's this interesting, super difficult to describe component to what is being seen. So even though what's being seen is a different form, that's not the part that's hard to describe. Because you can describe the outline. What's hard to describe is what you're actually visually getting as an input.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's very hard to describe that because it's so unlike other things that you look at. And so in your case, I was just curious whether or not you were seeing something that was doing that almost 2-dimensional ultra thin effect or not. And so thank you for making that distinction for me. Mm-hmm. Now, at what point were they the closest? Can you remind me? I think you said that they got fairly close at some point.
Yeah, I think the closest, I'm going to say maybe around, I know definitely 10 to 12 feet, but
that's pretty close.
So I'm gonna go with 10. Like part of me wants to say, well, maybe 8, but it was hard enough to see them. But I definitely know it wasn't yards away, because like that's when we first started seeing them. But then as we stopped and looked, that's when we noticed that they were actually moving in closer.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Would you say that they were coming in closer to you throughout this process at some point?
Perhaps because like for a while, we were still walking, so something catching our eye while you're moving isn't quite the same as when you just sort of pause and are taking it all in, and then you start seeing things moving, but nothing's there.
Aaron, one thing I wanted to ask, and I should have asked this earlier, my apologies. You keep saying they, so approximately how many of these figures would you say you were encountering, please?
That I'm not sure, because I was just so blown away. I'm going to go with around 4, because I know, because we were both looking and would look in different directions. So she was seeing some looking one way, and I was seeing them looking another.
Really interesting. The other question I have is, I think you did a very good job of describing like your astonishment, But were there any other emotions associated with the realization that you were, in fact, because I can kind of put myself in your shoes a little bit. I can be like, oh, what was that? I don't know. Let's just keep walking. Man, did you see that? I saw that. I don't know. And then when you're stopped and you're starting to see like maybe these things are starting to come closer, was there any other emotions or emotional reaction in your body that you can recall as part of this experience?
Other than just like curiosity and just being awestricken and overwhelmed, um, not really, because I mean, I'm thankful I'm one of the people that have had positive experiences with the paranormal. Because other experiences I've had that they're very unremarkable, like they wouldn't make TV or anything. But yeah, it was just sort of taking it all in, and at that point where I was like, I would still just go with nature spirits just because I didn't want to take the jump and just start saying fairy. But then when I looked into it and understood the word more, so now I just say fairy. Um, but then I think I largely would just go with nature spirit because I didn't know what they were, but I knew they weren't ghosts.
I'm kind of with you. After I saw my fairy, I was like, well, first of all, I just didn't want to believe it, but I was with another person and we were just so messed up from it. And like you're describing, it's just so like, whoa. And like you're describing, we just couldn't stop talking about it on our subsequent few hours after it happened. In your case, a drive home. In our case, just still sitting there in the cockpit. And so, as you go down that road of investigation, it's interesting the insights that you're gonna come across for sure. So there's about 4 of them, and you're right. They're not ghosts. They don't feel that. You feel something different. It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
I actually think that each fairy is an individual, like Bob or Jim or whatever. Like you're Aaron, I'm me. I don't think these are spirits of the forest, like you're saying. I don't think this is like you encountered Gaia or the spirit of trees. I think you encountered up to 4 individuals who were all very curious about you, all of whom live there, each of whom has a name and consciousness and makes independent choices about what they're doing each day, just like we do. Because my experience with my own fairy was that this was an individual fairy. This wasn't some grand representation of nature. This was it. And this is consistently true across many encounters. So I guess moving on now, I'd just like to sort of get into this leaf as you're leaving, which is really a fascinating detail in and of itself. How strong of a wind are you walking into? I mean, give it a miles per hour if you could, but if you can't, just kind of describe the amount of wind to the best of your ability, please.
What? I mean, it wasn't super strong. It was just. I mean, it was a gentle breeze, but it was very much like a breeze that would have been blowing a leaf on the path along with it. Like it was, and it wasn't, and we weren't, we were just taking our time. So it wasn't because we were walking that fast. I mean, it was a nice, steady breeze, but it wasn't like a hard wind. That's what made it so weird.
So like it would move your hair in your face if you.
Yes.
Now, when you say a leaf sound, I'd like to ask if you could describe that a bit better. Where my mind went was a dry leaf, like a dry maple leaf, skitting along the pavement or something on a dry fall day where the leaf isn't wet yet. That's what I was kind of thinking. And so could you maybe just help me actually have a better understanding and not just fill in my own blanks there? So what did this sound like exactly?
That would have probably been like exactly the sound, maybe like a larger maple leaf, but it was very much like a like distinctly like hitting the ground and skipping rather than like being pushed along. It wasn't scraping. It was a very steady skip.
And when you turned around, did you turn around in an immediate fashion upon this noise, or was it after a moment of contemplating with each other?
Well, that's the now I'm trying to think. That's the weird part because we heard it for a bit. It just happened that we both stopped at the same time to ask if we heard what we thought we did, which was the leaf coming up behind us against the wind. So like we heard it for a little bit.
What I'd like to ask is like, so if I'm imagining somebody coming up behind me, and I'm, say, just standing in a gymnasium, for example, I can tell you with my eyes closed, with them coming up behind me, when they're 50 feet away, 40 feet away, 30 feet away, 10 feet away, and right behind me, just on sound and feel alone. So how close behind you was this leaf?
Oh, for that, by the time we stopped, probably about 4 feet or so. Because like we were walking some time, but we were hearing the sound of a leaf, so we didn't think anything about it until it was close to us, and our brains were like, "Hey, that should not have happened." But there was no leaf though. There was just the sound.
Fairies are known to be tricksters, as they say. And shape-shifting also, I think, takes the form of the manipulation of auditory molecules, in effect, for lack of a better word. I know that isn't good science, but what I heard when I saw my fairy defied what my ears are capable of perceiving on some level. It was so loud. It was like a THX dragonfly. When I say THX,
Oh, wow.
That opening intro from,
Yeah.
It was like that in my head, in the room. Like if there was a cup of water on the desk, I felt like it would have been vibrating, like in Jurassic Park when the T-Rex is coming down the hill. And it was so complete. It was like both the light and the sound occupied more space in my mind than my eyes and ears are capable of physically perceiving, is how I would best describe it.
Wow.
And so it's just interesting, like there's no leaf there, so there is no physical auditory stimulus, right? We can both agree, based on your story, if you'd seen the leaf, then you could point to what made the sound, but you couldn't see it, but you can still perceive the sound.
Yeah.
So what I guess I'm trying to draw the similarities between my own experience, not to talk about it too much, and yours, is they can do stuff with both the way they appear, but I think also how they sound to us. And I think both capacities are part of their innate skill set as an energy being to do things that we have a hard time understanding within our plane. So it's just so fascinating that as you go to leave, it like sometimes too in fairy encounters, what's weird is that there's this disbelief going on. So like, for example, to talk about a couple other encounters, and I know that you haven't had a chance to listen to the show too much, so this is good because you're not being informed by other encounters. But like Mateus in Argentina, after he saw his fairy, he was just so obsessed with what had just happened that he saw it again almost 2 hours later in a totally different campsite, just for a second, flitting between the trees before he went to bed. And to me, my interpretation is that's the fairy giving him a little confirmation of like, you weren't crazy, you did see that. And so in yours, it's like that leaf as you're leaving is that last lingering detail to make sure that you leave with a memory of what you experienced confirmed by the Fae themselves somewhat. Because you got to think, well, what's the reasoning for making that sound behind you as you leave? The only logical thing that comes to my mind is to make sure you're fully tripped out.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah. And they do that, it seems. Like when they know that you've seen them and it was a benevolent exchange, they put a little cherry on the end of the exchange, like on the top of the ice cream sundae for you somehow. Maybe the mud. And I'd like to ask you about the mud as I finish my questions. Mm-hmm. No more immediate questions come to mind, unless, of course, I've sparked the memory of any other details that you'd like to share with us. The few last questions I'm going to ask you are about the mud, about how long this all took place during, so let's just start there. From start to you getting in the car and leaving, the weird strangeness that you were actively seeing these things and the leaf, about how much time is passing during this event?
From the time we got there to when we left, I wouldn't figure, I wouldn't think more than 90 minutes, just because where it is, we're also about 90 90 minutes or so north of where it was. So we still had a drive back and all of that. But yeah, everything like happened so quickly. We didn't really plan on actually experience anything almost as soon as we got out of the car. So yeah, we really weren't there all that long, but when you have an experience almost immediately, you don't really have to stay there that long.
I guess not. Yeah. And actually, like, I wouldn't maybe necessarily even feel comfortable after being so confused. And I can understand why you might have left thereafter. And so this mud on the side of the car, you say it looked like someone had taken fingers and rubbed some mud on the side of the car.
Yeah.
One of the questions that comes to my mind, and again, I do want to extend my appreciation, both myself personally and for the audience who is like right with me on all these questions. You know, they want to know this stuff too. So I do want to just extend that appreciation for being so generous with all these details with us. Were there any other cars there when you got there? I think you said no, but I just want to confirm that with you.
No. The only other people we saw were on horses.
Okay. And were they in the vicinity of your parked car when you saw the people on horses?
I'm trying to think. I think we saw them on the way in. And maybe glimpsed them later, but
so not likely that a person that you know had passed in the parking lot had done this. You know, they're using your car to lean up against while they fix their shoe or something. You know, it doesn't seem like that would have been a possibility based on the situation.
Yeah, and it was low enough. It was if it was a person, it would have it was low enough. They would have had to have been 3 or 4 years old.
Interesting. And so what kind of, just get into the mud a bit more. I know you described it as streaking fingers, but how many fingers? I guess just try to describe it a little bit better if you could, please. And I know it might be hard to, but I'm just curious if you can get into that detail a little bit more, if you could, please.
I remember that it looked more like just two, like just sort of like doing it on a whim, and however much they got on their hand or whatever, that was there. But it was very distinct that it did not splash up from a puddle or anything. It started. Oh yeah, because like the puddle would have splashed upward. It came down, so like it would have been from like a standing position, putting your fingers up and going from from the right down and to the left.
Sort of swiping them down as you would stand normally next to a car kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting detail. Possibly, and again, I'm just speculating. When I do speculate during these podcasts, I always stop myself the second I do it because who am I? But, you know, maybe also much like the leaf, a final marking on the car just to make sure that as you got out, you had another thing to think about and be perplexed on.
Yeah, and because like she was the one that actually brought it up to me.
The next day.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
She had gone out and it had caught her eye, and I didn't remember seeing it getting in. So, and then that's why we're like lost once more for an explanation.
When I know I said I was more or less done my questions, but because you've mentioned your friend again, I have been reminded of another question I was hoping to ask.
Mm-hmm.
When she was sort of getting some communication in bits and pieces, was that a real-time thing that she was relaying back to you as it was happening, or was that something she talked to you about after the fact?
That was during our time there. The last thing was when we were just trying to pick up a little rubbish and stuff, just the friendly gesture just to take some trash out that people just left. She had mentioned she was being directed to a tree, but she couldn't quite figure out what, or she kept getting an image of a bottle. So we just started looking around, and there was a knot hole in a tree near I don't know the name of it, but a shallow river runs by where we had parked. And so we're just looking around, and then she finally happens to notice sticking in the tree a bottle. And because it was kind of bugging her, because we didn't see any bottles, but she just kept getting this like image or like communication coming about a bottle. And then we found it in the tree. We stuck it in a bag with the rest of the stuff we had picked up, and that was it. And I think this is where I'm confused, because I don't know if this experience actually happened there or where I grew up, like visiting my family. But I think it may have been there. Like, I guess at one point, not necessarily the ones we were seeing, but others seemed to just sort of be like playing around where she was, because like she could hear like the laughter and stuff. So they were interacting a little bit with her. But like I said, I can't remember if it was there or an experience where I grew up.
Interesting. So as you're going to leave and pick up rubbish, she was getting signal to get this particular bottle out of there as part of that process, is kind of what it sounds like you're describing.
Yes.
And where exactly on the tree or in the tree was this bottle again, please?
It was probably maybe 4 feet or so up. You know, like about the height for somebody who's out there drinking to just conveniently realize they can just stick their bottle in the tree.
Was it a knot hole in the tree that it was stuck in?
Yes, yeah, just something natural where the branch had been lost or something over time.
Why do you think they wanted that out of there?
That the only thing I can get is we're already picking up trash, and they probably just didn't want it in there.
I'm not like an intuitive by any means, but doing this podcast has made some strange stuff come up in my day to day. And I think, and I'm probably wrong because again, I don't know for sure any of this stuff, but what I feel in this moment, and I never do this on a podcast, this is the first time I'll be doing this, is that that's a fairy house and something was blocking the way in, and they saw that you guys were able to receive messages and they asked you to get it out of there for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, we didn't know, we didn't know why. We just knew they didn't appreciate it being there. So we're like, okay, we got you.
There's a long folklore tradition of fairies, living in the little knots and crooks that you see in trees that look like little doors or little holes. And so that's just a very fascinating last detail. And I'm so glad that you were reminded of that as kind of a final note about your story's details to depart on. Your story is totally fascinating, and I'm so sorry to inject my conjecture into your story, but it just seems like so obvious to me that that's a fairy's door and someone jammed a beer bottle in there with no regard. And they probably were overjoyed to receive your assistance in pulling it out of there. Or, it's just they wanted that garbage gone as part of the cleanup, like you're saying. But why would they take the effort to send the message on something so specific anyway?
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, because like if it wasn't for their input, we would have just left and it would have still been in the tree. So
you may not have ever even thought to find it or look for it, it seems, because it's high up and it wouldn't necessarily be where you're looking for some garbage.
Yeah, and we didn't go down that far because we were just like getting stuff on the way to the car.
Interesting. So another hallmark of a real fairy encounter is a type of high fidelity, or sometimes broken up. It's not always high fidelity, but there's some sort of messaging, telekinetic messaging that they seem to be able to do with humans. My first guest, Ron, talks about them wanting to communicate with him telepathically and him being stubborn because he is a human and he wants to talk, but that the fairies did eventually teach him telepathic communication. I talked to a guest from Australia who had an encounter in New Zealand, and he was like coming up on this thing, and he got this crystal clear message in his head that was like basically like, I don't mean you any harm, you go your way, I'm going to go my way. And he describes it like he received the message into his head. Your friend also is receiving obviously like beyond sort of chance, beyond randomness, like get this bottle. She's thinking about this bottle.
Yeah.
You find this bottle. Not only are they able to communicate into our heads, it would appear, but they're able to send complex imagery, complex communications that are a little bit different than just words in your mind.
Yes. Yeah, and knowing somebody with such an ability, it in fact, like around other friends, like when things would happen, who wouldn't understand, like trying to downplay when something was like happening wherever we are, um, anything, be it fairy things or like human spirits, when they realize someone can actually pick up on them, especially if they have something to say, they can either be very excited or very, I don't want to, not aggressive, but like very assertive in coming through.
Pushy.
Yes.
I think of it as pushy.
Yes, exactly.
This is fascinating. That little last detail, as innocuous as it might seem, I really feel completes the truth of your story and really puts a cherry on it, to use my own analogy earlier of what the fairies do, in hearing your story. And so, it's really something I appreciate that you went back and found that last detail for us. As I move to let you go here, out of respect for your time and the audience's time here tonight, I would like to ask you just a final question, and then I'll open this up to your thoughts thereafter. So, there's no wrong answer here. There's no right answer here, because nobody has a fairy in a jar. I know we've talked tonight about some of my ideas and some of your ideas a little bit, but what I would like to ask you, and again, no wrong answer here. What, Aaron, do you think that fairies are? What do you think that what you experienced are? What do you think that fairies are is essentially my question.
Oh gosh, for me, I think they're largely just another neighbor that we have on this planet. Because humans try to make everything central to us. But, lions or bears, they don't care whether we're here or not. And I think it's largely the same. They're neighbors. I've just started using the term liminal entity just because I don't know what suits them better. And that's why I'm really excited that people are looking at it more in the sense of the paranormal and wondering more of what they are than like fairy tales, or for people that try to incorporate them more into spirituality. I think they're just our unusually different neighbors, like anything else that we have here.
I really appreciate that answer. It was well constructed and honest. Yeah, and for the audience listening, I've heard this word liminal so many times as I've gone down this fairy road. And if you don't mind, Aaron, can I define liminal for the audience? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Basically, it's referring to something in transition, in effect. So a liminal time would be the time between the start of something and the completion of something. A liminal event or a liminal entity would be something that is one place making a transition to another, but ultimately going back to its original place. So liminal basically is referring in effect to a transitional phase state, or a transitional, basically just something being in existence as a part of transition, or coming about in direct association to the act of transition. And in fairy culture, it seems like solstices, which are liminal times between winters and springs, or summers and falls, can bring about fairy encounters. Beautiful days, even the time of the day, so like a high noon is a liminal time in a day as the sun starts to descend after that type of thing. And so depending on exactly when in the day can also be part of the liminal aspect to a fairy encounter. incidentally, it would seem that there's liminal inside a person too. So some people are going through intense transitions interpersonally at the time in their life where they also have these encounters. So that's just a little bit to add on to liminal. And thanks for your answer again about what you think fairies are. So basically, I think we've really thoroughly covered your encounter, which again is incredible, very detail rich, has many of the hallmarks of fairy encounters that are being shared with me and are making their way into this podcast series. What I'd like to do is just as we move to sign off here, on behalf of all of our human and non-human listeners, really big thanks to Aaron from Indiana, sharing his encounter with some predator-like fairies in a national park almost coming up on 20 years ago. And so, Aaron, with that said, I just really want to extend my appreciation again on behalf of the audience and myself for your time tonight. Just really want to say thank you for being here. I really appreciate it a lot.
Oh, thank you for being that interested.
Your story is totally fascinating, and I'm sure, like I said, there are going to be people listening who are immediately brought so much comfort and are jumping out of their chair because they're like, Aaron saw what I saw. I knew that I wasn't crazy. I'm telling you, I'm going to get the emails.
That's what I felt the first time I saw anybody use the same predator description.
That's part of what I'm enjoying about doing this is the comfort that I'm receiving personally and getting to share, witness the comfort being extended amongst this community of people that are fascinated by this. And, as one of the people fortunate enough to have had a visual encounter with a fairy on this planet, you are doing everybody listening a huge service and a huge gift by being so open and taking the time to share. So with that, I'll let you go here tonight. For the audience listening, big thanks again to Aaron. I hope everybody out there is having a great evening. Thanks everybody for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thinking of the weight of the world and I'm carrying the largest load. Waiting to arrive by whatever there lies at the end of the road. If anybody's listening, then please do heed the call. If ever there was need, it's time to tumble all the walls. Is there anybody out there anyway? Is there anybody out there anyway? Thinking of the nature of man, and is there a master plan? 100 million dead by another man's hand, and still the bombs aren't banned. And you can feel the thunder of the babies when they grow. And you can see their halos when they walk into the room. Is there anybody out there anyway? Is there anybody out there anyway? dream.